Gaming has seen some pretty intense growth lately. When everybody started sitting at home all day during the lockdowns, a bunch of people suddenly started to get into gaming, and the community surrounding certain games seemed to grow. It continues to grow since gaming is a universal hobby that tons of people everywhere can enjoy. However, despite this rise in the popularity of gaming, there's been a common trend I've seen on the internet in more recent times. People have been complaining online that video games are boring nowadays. Some people feel like they might have outgrown games, others feel like all video games are bad and they're just not fun anymore. But why is this happening? What's the real problem underlying all of these complaints? Let's just dive right on into this topic. I've been playing video games for a long time now, but I didn't really get intensely into games until I picked up Assassin's Creed 2. That was really the gateway for me to uncover a ton of other franchises I'd end up falling in love with, like Call of Duty, Halo, Far Cry, and more. There are some games that I absolutely love, others that I find okay, and some that I find just plain boring and awful to play. That's the case for everybody out there too. No two people will be exactly the same in opinion. Even if you think a certain video game is the best game ever released, someone else might hate it with a burning and violent passion. That's why we have such a wide market of different video game offerings. It's a pretty competitive industry, but there's a game for everyone. There are simulation games like The Sims, there are shooter games like Call of Duty, there are story-driven games like The Last of Us. Basically, my point here is that if you have a certain interest, there's probably a game out there for you. So why do video games seem boring if there are so many out there? Well, I'm going to tackle the first angle, which is the quality of games being released nowadays. I mentioned this in a video about if modern video games are bad, but video games really started out with a lot more passion. The people behind video games used to actually think more about their product as a form of art and expression of their minds and opinions. And art in general really requires some level of passion to be genuinely good. When corporations started to take the idea of gaming and turn it more into a product that must have the profits beat out of it until the game can no longer be profitable, games became less passion and more corporatized. Live service models, microtransactions, loot boxes, battle passes, etc. These were all tools designed to create maximum levels of profit. When you grind a battle pass, you'll want to spend money to get the stuff in the battle pass. Otherwise, you're grinding for some very low-level, uninteresting things. Corporations have really tried to make games about money, and it makes sense because they're corporations. Still, when you as a person playing games feel the need, not the want, but the need, to have to put all of your time and all of your energy and all of your efforts into grinding this single game to get a few cosmetics, you're probably going to start feeling burnt out. It becomes more of a chore to boot up a game than it is a thing to relax and unwind with. Games are like other forms of entertainment such as books and movies. You immerse yourself in them in order to have fun, escape from the real world for a bit, imagine yourself in another place or something entirely different. Typically, you're not going to be playing a video game if it's not fun. Multiplayer competitive games often have some of the most miserable fan bases that you may seldom never hear something good about the game from. Why do they continue playing the game if it's so bad? Well, it's almost like an addiction. In reality, for example, something like drugs, you know that they're bad for you, but that sudden hit of dopamine keeps people coming back. That same principle is applied to even video games. You hate this competitive game, but unlocking that battle pass here gives you a sudden dopamine hit. You got this super cool skin for your super cool character that you may never even use, but you were rewarded. So is this really what we consider fun? It's boring after a while. You become so used to the hits of dopamine that it's not fun. Instead, you're sitting there, bored out of your mind, wishing to quit the game, but you're stuck in a loop of wanting reward after reward for no apparent reason. And you've sunk hundreds of dollars into a game that you end up hating after a few months. So maybe you should stop playing certain games, and by certain games, I mean heavily monetized multiplayer games. If you find that playing Call of Duty feels like a chore and makes you slam your keyboard into the wall, then I think it's time to step away from that game and try something different. You may find that the entire time, the only reason this game was so boring to you was because it just wasn't the right fit for you. There are plenty of great single-player games out there that provide rewards via story or maybe some in-game things that you find. They don't try to dangle, for example, monetized skins in your face because you don't need them to enhance your gameplay at all. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't microtransactions in these games, but they're not as heavily enforced as maybe some multiplayer games. Lots of story-driven video games rely more on narrative with fun and interesting gameplay, and that might be your speed. There's no false dopamine hit from a battle pass. paths, you're just immersed in a story. But still, a lot of video games are boring nowadays because major corporations are also not changing the formulas. They keep emulating what worked the first few times, but after so many of the same Far Cry games, you're probably going to get bored. Innovation is needed, but corporations are playing it safe. That's why so many games that release are boring. They're just trying to recreate what succeeded the first few times without realizing that eventually the same thing over and over and over again becomes, well, boring. Games have simple formulas underlying their structure. You have a task, you get a reward. That's how games are built. What you do around that structure is what matters to the player. The more repetitive your game is, the less that reward matters anymore to the player. Elden Ring, for example, took a pretty interesting niche and expanded on it with something new and innovative. Soulsborne games are typically linear and they have a similar gameplay loop. Elden Ring gave players an open world. So now you can go and spar off with as many bosses as you can find aside from the main ones and explore the world to your liking. It's innovative for the niche. Call of Duty has been taking hits recently in popularity amongst fans online because a lot of the people who play Call of Duty today have been playing it for years on end. Imagine playing the same game slightly changed every single year. That's boring. Black Ops 2, for example, did something unique for Call of Duty. They had a blend of futuristic, boots on the ground elements. They didn't go too crazy with anything. It had a good aesthetic, good gameplay balance, good rewards, decent level of monetization that wasn't crazy, and it was fun. It positioned itself in a good spot and became one of the most famous Call of Duty games ever. Then after Black Ops 2, Call of Duty tried to experiment with more futurism, and that didn't really sit well with fans. It's okay, it's fine, so they went back to the old style, but then started pumping their games with loot boxes and more microtransactions, and now it's not just skins, but there's a battle pass. Oh, and almost every recent Call of Duty has been broken to insane lengths at release. And it's pretty much the same game every year, with the same formula, the same grind, and the same loot. Nothing is really changing. And that's the definition of insanity. If you find that the game you're playing is boring, take a break from it. You might find that the game itself is just not your thing anymore, or you're burnt out. Play something else and see what happens. Maybe you'll enjoy it more than you thought. A lot of games I never considered playing ended up being among my favorite games ever. But if the game that you're playing also starts to feel like a chore, you're going to get burnt out. It's not a game anymore at that point. Games are supposed to be about fun. Thanks for tuning into DZSH Gaming. If you enjoyed that video, feel free to subscribe with notifications set to all so you never miss out on a single upload. Leave a like and comment below, and be sure to check out our website for gaming news, entertainment, and more. The links to everything are, as always, in the description below.